opinions expressed by the presenters and guests are their own, and they do not necessarily reflect those of Equitable Bank. This podcast is presented for general informational purposes only and is not intended to provide investment or legal advice.
Welcome back to Equitable Bank's More Bank for Your Buck podcast. Today, Phil and I are going to be talking about fraud.
And Erol, I think it's very timely because anecdotally, we've seen a significant rise in all sorts of fraud at the local branch level. I don't know if you're seeing that in Omaha as well, but it seems like, as people talk, economy's slowing down maybe just a little bit, economic conditions are getting a little bit tighter, and I think that's when desperations can kind of meet, people that are maybe struggling. Fraudsters can come to them with some opportunity where they could make a ton of money, and it seems more appealing than it might have a year ago. And on the flip side of that, the fraudsters, that this is the way they make their living or whatever it might be, they're getting more and more desperate to grab onto these funds of other people. So we're really seeing a significant uptick in fraud, and that's why we're having the conversation here today, because it is so prevalent in today's society.
And fraud is a big business. It is a $5.8 billion industry as of last year.
Yeah, I always tell people the fraudsters would stop calling if it stopped working.
Yes. And technology, the tools that are out there for fraudsters to use, and just the ease of information right now. You think about how society's really moved to more of a social media, everything's out there. I share everything with everybody. It's not too hard for identity theft to occur, for a fraudster to figure out, spouses, children's names. The mother's maiden name used to be kind of the password, right, in the banking industry. Dates of birth, that kind of stuff. And that information is so easy to acquire these days. It makes it easier and easier for those that are trying to take advantage of others to really make that happen. And then there's so many different types of fraud. We can't really cover them all today, but I think we want to start this dialogue with our audience because it's real. We see it every single day, and
they're getting good.
They're really good, and it can come in so many different forms that, I think I have fairly great amount of common sense in my life in the way that I view things, but it doesn't really matter. You could get taken advantage of in a moment and not realize that, I just did something wrong. And if the money has been sent, it's gone.
Right.
And wire fraud, I would say, in the banking world is the greatest risk of loss, because in a wire transfer setting, depending on the way it was initiated, or ACH funding, once the money's gone, it's gone. And very rarely can we get it back. And so, let's talk a little bit about wire fraud, because that's what we're seeing, ACH fraud, those sorts of things. And then we can talk a little bit more about some of the other types that we're seeing out there.
Well, and I think so many people, when they think of fraud, they're most worried about their FICO score. It's, I don't want someone stealing my information and opening a credit card or an auto loan in my name. And those types of frauds certainly happen. But to speak to your previous point, wire fraud or outright instances where people are literally handing over money to the fraudster, not knowing they're being defrauded, those are of our utmost concern right now. So wire fraud, to put it simply, is when you believe you are in good faith sending money to, could be a customer, could be a vendor, whoever it might be, and somehow in that process, your either request for information or them sending the wire instructions to you gets intercepted by a fraudster. Yeah. They've hacked your email, they've hacked a server, whatever it might be, and they input their information so that when you send the wire, and let's say you're buying a vehicle from the Ford dealership and you're going to wire the money out, they take the email from Ford, they take out their information, they insert their information, you send them the $50,000 for the new vehicle, it's gone. There's no way of getting it back. This is happening across the country on a daily basis. Errol, I think you said you recently had an instance of this in your branch.
That exact same thing happened to a client a couple of years ago. The dealership was real. The vehicle he wanted to purchase was real on their lot. He was not interacting with an employee of that dealership, but rather a fraudster. Via email, didn't know it.
Well, and how, if you're the fraudster, you can look at the same webpage. Oh, yeah, that's a great vehicle. It's this year. Here are the details. I mean, you could be looking at the same webpage as them, reading off the details. How would you ever know the difference? I mean, unless you look through the roster of who the employees are, which could be changing on a weekly basis. I mean, it's so easy to slip that fraud in there. And from a bank standpoint, the only way we can mitigate that fraud is with a callback. And now in our wire department, one thing that we are very diligent on, and sometimes it can be a little bit of a nuisance if you're trying to get a wire out before cutoff and it's 2:30 and we got to get it going, but we have to wait for this callback to verify the wire. This is why. So what a callback is I want to send $50,000 to XYZ customer. They've sent this information to us. We've inputted in our wire form. Before we hit send on that wire, we are calling the receiving bank and we're calling that customer to make sure, is this the correct information before we send this wire? Because, as you said, if we hit send, there's no going back. That money's gone.
Right. And, in real estate purchases, the title company, I mean, they all have those disclosures now on the bottom of every single email that focus on wire fraud. And it's so easily done that now when I see a wire request, the first thing I do is I call my client. And not every bank's going to be able to do that. But it's important for me to understand, one, because I know my client's voice. I'm going to call them on their phone. I'm going to say, hey, I just saw an email, because typically that's how it happens. I just saw an email came through requesting a wire transfer. Just want to make sure this is legit. Yes, I need to do that. Okay, what is happening? One, what's the situation? Why do we need to wire the money? How did you get those instructions? And have you physically called anybody and talked to them, or is it all via email? And oftentimes asking that additional question, just pausing for a moment, and particularly if it's completely outside of the normal protocol of business, right? Understanding our clients and knowing how they function. I had a situation last week where a client's office manager hits a link in an email to ACH, a vendor that they know they owe money to. They've been talking to this person on the phone, and boom, $11,000 invoice went out, and that was it. Well, it was fraudulent. Their email had been hacked. They knew that they were trying to get paid because they could see all the communication, and the link went elsewhere, and it went to a bank that wasn't even theirs. Fortunately enough for my client, the receiving bank had already flagged that account as a fraudulent account. The money was frozen. It didn't go anywhere, so we were able to get that back.
And there are some instances of that where
it's rare.
It is rare.
It's
People
rare.
need to understand that it's rare.
And the first question I asked was, how do you normally pay that vendor? Well, we normally cut a check, and his wife comes and picks it up. There's a major variance there in the normal protocol, and so to our audience, be thinking about this. If it seems out of place, it oftentimes is. And one phone call would have fixed that, because they would have called the customer back and said, hey, I just got an email with a link to pay you for the invoice. Is that how you want to be paid? I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Is exactly what they said when they did call. And so then I probably shouldn't be clicking on this, and then if you clicked on a link, what else is going to come with that, right? What other Trojan viruses are in there that now are in your computer systems that are tracking everything, right? It's so easy for the crooks to get your information to do more damage, because that ultimately is how they get paid.
And we see a lot of it come through email channels, because email, for all of how great of a service it is not highly secure.
Right.
And we are starting to see more banks, more title companies, more businesses, when they send wire instructions, they will actually send them through a secure mail channel that will require a login to go access those wire instructions, just for this reason, because there is so much fraud. And like you say, especially with title companies, because fraudsters, they go where the money is. And in a lot of real estate transactions, you're talking about north of 6 figures, sometimes north of 7 figures. So it only takes one of those to be intercepted for it to be a huge payday for these people perpetrating fraud. You know, the other thing we see is what the Federal Trade Commission has identified as imposter fraud. And this is a scenario where, again, it goes back to, you know, we're in this global digital society with so much social media and so much of an online presence that I might not know who you are, but if I take 5 minutes in a Google search, I can get on your Facebook profile, maybe your Twitter, your LinkedIn. I know where you work, who you're married to, if you have kids, and what you're doing on a regular basis.
Right.
People use this information to, I believe, isolate individuals that they think that they can gain confidence with. You know, 20 years ago, we call this a con man or a con person. And they impersonate somebody either in their life, connected to them, a few people removed, or someone entirely different. We recently had a circumstance at the bank here within the past couple of weeks where they believed that they were contacted by the IRS, that someone from the IRS contacted them. They said, your account's been frozen. It had not been frozen. But, you know, if you're an individual and you get a phone call from the IRS, I'm sure you're terrified. And if you don't have a good personal relationship with a banker, perhaps, or if you don't have a lot of family members close by to really bounce this situation off of, because of course they're telling them all the things like, you know, you're under investigation, you can't go to the cops about this, we're the IRS, you can't talk to anybody about this, you can't talk to your bank, you're in really serious trouble, you need to start sending us money via, I'm going to say it wrong, but maybe iTunes gift cards or something along those lines. But, you know, they really prey on the fear of others. And they start small. I mean, a lot of these frauds, it seems like they start with, you know, it can be a small dollar amount, $500, $1,000, $2,000, but that's just where it starts. And once they have their hooks into these people, it's, well, they were good for $2,000, we'll try $5,000 next time, or $7,000 or $10,000. I mean, you see newspaper articles on a daily basis where someone's been defrauded of $100,000, $150,000, $200,000. And it's a lot of times situations where these people, they didn't have that money just to throw away. I mean, no one wants to throw away $200,000. But when someone is draining half of their life savings, thinking that they are doing something good and helping someone else who's in a bad situation, and all they've done is funded some fraudster in some faraway land, it's something we have to talk about.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, the elder abuse, I mean, the vulnerable demographic oftentimes are the elderly that are isolated, that don't see their family very often, that don't recognize voices because they can't quite hear very well. You know, we hear a lot about this is your grandchild. You know, I'm studying abroad. I just got arrested. I need you to send me money so I can get out and get home. Please don't tell mom and dad, right? Mm-hmm. All these things. And so, we see it, unfortunately, every single day in our industry. You know, you talked a little bit about the prepaid cards. I know the Better Business Bureau does a lot with regards to just bringing light to some of the trends that are happening. A couple of years ago is the green dot cards, but you could go, you know, prepay on these basically throwaway Visa cards that you would just then ship. Or really, they would just say, give me the numbers, and then they could go online and pull the funds and direct them out of there that never even needed the card, but they needed you to go out and put, you know, $5,000 on this card, then give me the numbers, and I've got it.
Right.
And so it can happen so fast you don't even know what's happening.
Well, and with the rise of cryptocurrency, I mean, they don't even need the green dot cards. They don't need the iTunes gift cards, whatever it might be. It's send me $10,000 in Bitcoin, and then it is really gone.
Yeah.
I think.
And those are the system takeovers, right? If you're a business owner, it happens to hospital systems. It happened in Omaha, right? A complete business shutdown because they can't even access their computer systems to deliver whatever service or value that they are delivering. And then they get the call. We've got you. You can't access anything until you send us X dollars in crypto. Here's where you send it.
Right.
And if you want to function, take it. And there's even no guarantee after that point in time, you send the money that, oh, well, we just wanted to make sure you had it. double that, and then we'll release it. And then you're really at the mercy of those criminals to give you your livelihood back.
And I think, the important takeaways for me is, I look at fraud in two different ways. There's the commercial, the business side that I think our customers really need to be cognizant of. And then there's the individual side of it. A lot of the things we talked about on the business side is wire fraud. I mean, that's a huge concern, and that's why we have processes in place to help prevent that. I think online banking, sometimes people get nervous about online banking. I don't want all my information out there, but it is highly secure, and it's a wealth of information for you as a business owner so that you can monitor your accounts on a daily basis. If you're someone that's not using online banking, whether you're a business or an individual, you could go 2, 3, 4 weeks before you realize your account's even been compromised. Because a lot of times when someone gains access to your account, they don't just drain it from word go. They start with smaller transactions. Whereas if you're a business owner using online banking, not having to wait for paper statements to come in the mail, right, and then look through the checks and whatever else has gone through your account, you can identify those transactions as they're happening in real time, which is, one of the features we offer is mobile alerts. I have this set up on my phone. I think it's a great feature. You swipe your debit card, and within 10 seconds, you get an alert. Hey, your card was just swiped at XYZ gas station for $17. You know it's legit.
Right.
Whereas if someone compromises your debit card from 400 miles away and swipes it and it goes through, you're going to know right away, oh no, I've got fraud. I'm calling the number in the back of the card. I'm calling my banker. We're going to get this looked into.
Yeah, going to my app and turning my card off.
Exactly.
Just turn it off right there. Phil, that's so important. And another feature that you're seeing more commonly used is that dual authentication. When you're logging in and making decisions or making changes, when you log in, it asks you, is this you? And typically it's either via text message to your cell phone or an email back to you that you can acknowledge it. But how important that just that second phase of approval is. And in your business, that second phase of approval, if you have an employee, let's say creating ACH batches or wire batches, that they build it, right? And they submit it to be processed. Well, who else in that organization is reviewing those and then giving the final approval prior to the bank then getting that file? And that dual approval process is really important. Oftentimes when we see fraud, that is skipped. It's one person, oh, I thought this was something that you wanted me to do, and I just submitted it, and then it's done.
Right.
So a second set of eyes is always important. And then back to the consumer side, we talk about this a lot in the industry. It's making sure that you are talking to your family, your parents, your grandparents, and sometimes even your siblings about fraud and about. Have you ever gotten a phone call about this? Have you seen any of these sweepstake letters that
I've won so many lotteries, Erol, I can't even count.
But we file 9 it, right? It just goes right into the shredder or the trash or whatever that looks like. But somebody that is sitting at home, a widow that doesn't see their family all the time, loves every single piece of mail that they get, and they want to read it. Wow. I really am living paycheck to paycheck in retirement, and this just says I just won, $50,000. All I have to do is call this number and give them my information. I get it.
How can I not do that?
Right.
Yeah.
And they don't even understand what's happening. And so it's important for our viewers, for us, and our clients to be talking about fraud, because it's not a matter of if it's going to happen. All of us are going to be exposed to one level of fraud or another. It's when is it and how are we going to respond to it? Are we going to identify it? Because they're getting very good at making it look legit.
Oh, absolutely. I got an email just this week, and I do have a PayPal account, so it makes sense that I get an email from PayPal, because one of the things you can typically look at when you get one of these questionable, what we call phishing emails, where they're looking for information, is it might say it's from Amazon, Walmart, PayPal, whomever. But when you actually look at the address from which the email originated, it's at info.com or at orders.com or some generic email address that is clearly not coming directly from Amazon. The email I got was from service@paypal.com. I have no idea how they sent it. It looked very legitimate with the PayPal logo. All of the colors were right. The actual structure of the email looked correct, but the English and the grammar was pure garbage. I mean, that's typically a dead
errors.
That's usually a dead giveaway. I mean, because a lot of these fraudsters are from, believe it or not, other countries other than the United States, which makes it even more difficult to prosecute them.
Right.
So, this money ends up in Jamaica, the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, Europe, wherever. I mean, your local PD is not going to be able to do a whole lot to help you get that money back. No. But they are just getting so good at it. And I think one of the things you can do is just have a relationship. If you're an individual wanting to protect yourself from fraud, there are electronic services that can help monitor your identity. I don't think that is as prevalent as maybe as it once was, because like I say, I feel like the fraudsters are moving more from trying to impersonate you as an individual to trying to impersonate someone you trust that you will just willingly hand money to. But I think it's important to, have that family member that you feel comfortable talking about your money, talking about your finances with, whether that's a child, a sibling, a parent, whoever it might be. You just need to have that second opinion. If you don't, you just talked about people that can be isolated and don't have a lot of family close. That's one of the great things about a community bank is there's always someone in the bank and there's always someone that's got time to talk to you. Yeah. Go in there, develop that relationship with the banker so that, when you get one of these emails or when you get someone on the phone call and you saying, hey, I need help, I need $500, whatever it is, you can talk to your banker and say, I think I know this person. I'm not really sure. Can you help me tell if this is legitimate? I want to help him if I need to, but I really don't know, because I think that's where a lot of the trouble starts is these folks, they're in isolation. They don't have anybody to really bounce what's going on off of, and they just start down this path of, well, I've helped this person, and it's almost like they develop a relationship with them unknowingly. It's a fraudster. It's perpetrating a confidence game where they're building that trust, and it's like they don't want to look back, that, we've gone this far together, and it's almost hard to unwind that once they've started down that road.
And who wants to be embarrassed?
Oh, God, no. Absolutely.
Nobody wants to admit that I just lost all this money.
Right.
And so it becomes kind of hard to talk about.
And it's unfortunate, but it's nothing to be embarrassed about. You and I have talked about how many businesses, large businesses, sending vast sums of money where, again, they're getting really good. It's nothing to be ashamed of.
Absolutely not.
The most important thing is talk about it, get it out in the open, and get it stopped.
Yes.
Because
oftentimes when it starts, it can go on for years.
Absolutely.
And it could literally just be, $500 here, $200 there, $1,000 here. And then over the course of a 2 or 3 year span, you're talking 30, 40 grand. And yeah, it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's happening every single day. And really, I feel like tellers and personal bankers, lenders, those are the front line of defense.
Absolutely.
Oftentimes, because we get to see those clients walk in and initiate that somehow. And then the technology has gotten so good too, with credit card companies, banks having systems in place that are watching for those irregularities, watching for those types of online transactions that, this client's never shopped here. They just use their card at the gas pump, and now all of a sudden it's saying they're down in Alabama.
Right.
The systems are getting much better at catching it quickly. But you're right in that. I think the impersonating those that we know, like, and trust, and we aren't going to question it, that's where the big money is. Yeah.
And if you have questions, call into the branch.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so difficult to do this on your own if you don't know where to go. Erol talked a lot about the electronic systems in place. One thing that can be frustrating for me from time to time, and I understand why it's there, is I'll swipe my debit card and I'll get it declined. And it's like, what in the world's going on? And then shortly thereafter, my phone rings. And it's what you're talking about. In the back room, these processes are in place that, maybe I've never swiped my card at Menards before because I can barely change light bulbs. What's Phil doing at a hardware store? And it'll decline my card because that's not a recurring transaction. So I have to answer the phone and tell them, no, I know I shouldn't be at Menards, but here I am. It's okay. And then the transaction will go through. And a lot of these safeguards, and no different than the double check on the wire, They can be cumbersome from time to time, especially when we're in a hurry. We're all in a hurry, but they are all there because once the money's gone, it's really hard to get back.
Right.
And I think, moving forward, there's just a few key takeaways. It's one, before you send money anywhere, whether it's wire, using your credit card, sending money to a family member, no matter what, know who you're talking with. Actually know them, not just, we've talked on the phone a couple times. You need to know them and you need to verify. It's always trust but verify. Well, I trust you are who you say you are, but what's the second check in this series of events that I can really verify? Like, you're a customer at the auto dealership. That's one of those scenarios where a quick call to the auto dealership before you send the wire to verify the transfer could have prevented that.
Right.
And in a lot of scenarios, it's just taking that next step. And like I say, we're all busy. We're all in a hurry to get things done, but sometimes just slowing down for a few seconds to make sure that, this is really my intent, and verifying that process can save a lot of grief in the long run.
Absolutely.
Well, folks, with that, I think we're going to wrap up our episode here on fraud and the things that you need to know. Again, if you have any questions about fraud or you think you've been a victim of fraud, don't ever hesitate to ask. No one at the bank is ever going to criticize you or chastise you for calling and saying you might have been a victim for fraud.
Right.
Be cognizant, folks. No one's ever going to call you from the bank and tell you that your account's been compromised and you need to take all the money out of your bank account or you need to send it all to this secure lockbox. No one from the IRS, to my knowledge, is coming around throwing people in jail yet because of X, Y, and Z reasons, or the DEA or the FBI or any of those. I mean, it's all very believable. Mm-hmm. It's all from, positions of authority, it seems like, whether it's the bank or someone impersonating the IRS. But you just have to take a step back, think about the process and say, does this make sense?
Right.
Is this reasonable? Does this make sense? And I think if you just put those few safeguards in place, that you can protect yourself, your loved ones, whomever it might be, from this next $10,000 or $15,000 scam we're going to see in the paper.
Right.
Thanks for joining, Erol.
Thanks for having me, Phil. Till next time, this is Equitable Banks, more bank for your buck. See you next time.
Want to thank our audience for joining us today on More Bank for Your Buck, and looking forward to our next podcast together. Phil?
Sounds great. Thanks, Erol.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The opinions expressed by the presenters and guests are their own, and they do not necessarily reflect those of Equitable Bank. This podcast is presented for general informational purposes only and is not intended to provide investment or legal advice.